Well, let's understand all of this. I'm being joined live in our Lagos studio by the Chief Investment Officer of AfriInvest West Africa, Mr. Robert Motude. Good afternoon, Mr. Motude.
Thank you.
It's good to have you in the studio. Yes, it's sad looking at Dr. Harry's death. You know, we're expecting him to come up with this, but, you know, we still have to look at the figures and see what we expect. I have gone through doing my own research. I see projections of about 15.8%. Some say 15.7%. I don't know, what's your overview and what are you expecting the next inflation figures for the month of March 2022?
Yeah, let me start by saying that may God grant Dr. Harry's soul eternal repose.
Amen. Amen.
You know, the good thing is that MBS is an institution. You know, it's sad that it's gone now.
Just 8 months.
Yeah, I mean, 8 months after its appointment.
Yeah.
But I believe that this will not in any way affect the inflation figure, which is expected tomorrow. It's also sad that we are where we are, you know, in terms of general price level in the economy, given that, you know, I mean, coming into after the moderation we were seeing in 2021, one would expect that should continue in 2022, but that's not to be. Again, those are not issues that are only domesticated to Nigeria. They also have global perspective. You know, for instance, inflation as we know it now, it's a global phenomenon.
Yes, 8.5% in the United States.
Exactly. You know, and of course, because of energy crisis, Russia and Ukraine war, it's taking its toll on global energy prices, and this is feeding into, you know, the consumer price indices across, you know, major developed economies. You know, Nigeria not being an exception. So even the diesel costs, which was responsible for the acceleration that we saw in the month of February. To 15.7%, and even PMS prices, they are all, you know, derivative of crude oil, which of course prices have been going up. You know, the volatility suggests that, you know, at some point we may see some sort of moderation, especially if you're going to put a rein on the Russia-Ukraine war. Unfortunately, the war is getting tougher because everybody's talking tough. Russia is talking tough, Ukraine
talking tough.
You know, talking tough. You know, even the world, the West significantly, the US is talking tough. You know, accusing President Putin of war crimes and, you know, all of those issues that could escalate the war, so to speak. So we may have this volatility with us for some time, because if you look at it, I mean, at some point we hit about 117, 118 in terms of oil prices. We saw a decline, you know, as we speak, we are hovering between, you know, slightly below 100 and, you know, above, you know, the $100, you know, as we speak. So we are not going to likely see a major turnaround in terms of energy costs, because for us, even if we are not picking it from the perspective of PMS, which is, as we know it now, regulated, is affecting diesel costs.
Sure.
And the cost of diesel is very major for industries
and all of that.
And even households now.
Yeah.
Again, because energy crisis is getting worse in terms of power supply. So if people don't have power, they must get power anyhow, you know, if not from the grid, from, you know, using alternative sources. And most of those are powered by diesel, you know. And to the extent that diesel is fully deregulated, as we see surges in energy prices globally, this will feed into the local prices of diesel as well. So we think that there are still pressure that the, you know, economy will deal with. The Monetary Authority will also have to grapple with in terms of containing inflation. The good part of it also is that it's cost push, meaning there are supply side related pressures. So I should not expect that there should be major moves from monetary policy naturally. But if I take the tone of what the last monetary policy, you know, is like, is looking like some members of the committee are already supporting a hike.
An increase, yeah.
You know, an increase, you know. This is also not, I mean, there are dimensions to the, you know, inflation, you know, escalation in Nigeria as we speak, because this is a year where I mean, you were talking about, crude oil theft and the revenue fundamentals of government that currently is being challenged. This also means that government is going to be taking a lot of borrowing. I mean, if you take a cue from the budget, government is planning to borrow nothing, from the face of the budget, close to about 7 to 8 trillion. But in the real sense of it, if the actual revenue we think is, achievable, is to be put into context, government may be borrowing as much as 10 trillion, right, in this current fiscal year. So what this tells us is that, and then the market. So again, when government wants to borrow, government will borrow either from the local market or the external, market. Within the local market, investors are every day seeking high-yielding investments, high-yielding securities. And to the extent that, I think towards the end of last year and coming into 2022, the DMO was able to put a rein on interest rates at the short end of the market, treasury bills particularly, and we had some continuous drop for some time. But from the last treasury bill auction, we are beginning to see uptick. More so because as we go into the month of April, this month particularly, the extent of or the liquidity in the system is not sufficient to cater for the needs in terms of where we expect the supplies to come from, government, particularly for budget support, and from the DMO calendar that we saw, for the Q2, it is indicative that government is seeking to borrow more than they typically will borrow. So that will also mean that these inflation factors will affect the yield that investors are actually asking for. So government may actually be borrowing at a much higher cost than they've done in Q1. So inflation is a major phenomenon, that affects every aspect of our life. Talk about growth. It will have its impact on growth because again, consumer wallet will shrink as to the extent that the income of the people will not grow and inflation is rising. So it means the real income is shrinking. Real income is talking about your purchasing power, basically. What can I, buy with the 100 naira that I have in my pocket? So output will drop, and as output drops, growth shrinks. So it's going to affect so many things. And then you're talking about electioneering campaign, the insecurity in the land, which is worsening.
I want to tie that to my next question, food. Food. Because we've seen hikes in, of course, gas, fuel, we've talked about that, wine, tobacco, narcotics, and of course, yam, tubers, and all of that, and insecurity is somewhere around that corner. Do you see that also reducing in any way?
Well, I mean, tackling insecurity has become something very difficult to predict in this environment. Scary. But I think we still must continue to say that the fundamental, function of government should be the protection of lives and properties.
I agree with you.
Now, we're talking about Ukraine, Russia, where there is war, and everybody knows why food coming from that, territory is challenged. Again, because, we've analyzed that between Russia and Ukraine accounts for close to 30% of global wheat supplies. So if you are seeing bread prices going up, it's because the prices of wheat are also going up because of shortage of supply. But can we say that we are at war in this country, given the level of insecurity that we face, most especially from, the food, where we normally we get our food, from the northern part of the country. Insecurity issues in Nigeria today, cuts across, from the north, south, east, west, everywhere. But can we declare that we're at war? I mean, if we know that we're at war, we will do something extraordinary, to fight the war. Because, the sad thing is war within, we're waging war within. There are wars that are generated from within the country. But they must still be tackled, because if we do not, I don't even know how much monetary policy can tackle the problem of supplies created by insecurity, because farmers could not go to the farm, or they couldn't harvest what has been planted. So I think there's limit to what monetary policy can do about that. So this is a major fiscal problem, issue. That I think that government should take more seriously, more so that we are entering gradually into the electioneering period where the government will want to seek the votes of the populace. I mean, one of the things you should bring on board is to say, we have insecurity, you've tackled it, and maybe by then they listen to you. So, but I think the issue of security cannot be, overemphasized. It's something we need to fix. Otherwise, we continue to have this issue around, food prices, and food is major in our CPI basket right now, accounting for about 50.1% of the entire basket. So, I mean, it's something that government needs to take more seriously as we speak. Yeah.
I'm worried. Public debt about 39.56 trillion naira, something around that, from about 32.92 that we had, I think, a year before. And I'm looking at this affecting FDIs and, of course, return on investment. What does this also mean for Nigeria's economy?
Well, I think that our debt profile will worsen. And I'm not a prophet of doom, but it's just reality.
Just reality.
Yeah, again, because
subsidy is about 4 trillion naira. Yes, that's a request.
And then government has an ambitious budget in the year of 2022. This budget, the government hope to fund this budget using oil revenue, non-oil revenue borrowing. Now, oil revenue was supposed to account for the least, in terms of sources of funding for the budget revenue of the government, because debt is the highest, followed by the non-oil revenue and then the oil revenue. Now, this oil revenue is now what is being challenged now by the thefts we're talking about. Whether it's true or not, rumor has it that 80% of government revenue is being lost to thefts. So that will mean that government will borrow more. And that's sacrosanct. They just have to borrow to keep the government afloat. So the debt profile will definitely worsen. Now, where we need to begin to, again, it boils down to, how secure the country is, to find out that something that is so crucial to the survival of the country is being stolen, and we cannot identify or capture those who are doing it. That's sad, right? But if we leave the politics of things and just focus on the economy, it will mean that for us to get out of this issue, these problems, there's some sort of internal cleansing that we have to do. And this will come
across board.
Yeah, across board, yes. Is there a possibility that we can think of spending less? And because it's an election year, I fear that may not be possible. So which then means that beyond even what we can borrow from the capital markets or international market, we may even see more of ways and means funding of the budget, what economists call monetary financing, a situation where the central bank just prints money and we use it to support the government. So these are issues that the country will face. Unfortunately, we are not able to attract FDI and FPIs, like you mentioned. The issues are really not far-fetched. Now we are talking about policy normalization in most systemic central banks because of global inflation phenomenon. So what you then see is that more investors find it convenient to take funds to other emerging markets or developed markets than a frontier market like Nigeria. That's a bit unstable. So FDI, it dates back beyond this current administration. For as far back as over 12 to 13 years, our FDI, profile keeps, dropping. Perhaps what we can speak to is the foreign portfolio investment, where investors can also come into the country, inflow some of the, FX that can help support our reserves. Unfortunately, the yield environment has not also encouraged. Up until the last Treasury bills auction, we still have a single-digit rate for the longest tenure in the market. Something within the neighborhood of 5%. That's still low compared to what investors will be seeking to invest in a risky economy like Nigeria. And even if they want to go long term, look at where the level of inflation for Nigeria is, and look at where the yield environment is. Up to now, the longest yielding instrument in Nigeria is still about 13%. Already, imagine an FPI coming from the US where inflation is already 8.5.
8.5.
You know, they are seeking to beat that, you know, level of inflation. That's plus an additional risk they are taking on our currency, because FPI means that you're taking a risk on Nigeria's currency. You know, that's another thing. Investors would think that our currency is not properly priced, especially at the official window. So those are some of the, you know, risk factors that will also prevent investors from coming into Nigeria to invest. So I think for now, we should put FPI and FDI aside. They won't likely come. You know, more so that we are now going into the election period. You know, they probably will want to find out who the next president will be and what will his policy inclination will look like. You know, because it will guide them to then, you know, make decisions. But for now, I think we should not expect much from FPI and FDI.
Oh, we're wrapping up now. I'm looking at the supply chain issue that we touched on, and wheat is one of it. And now we see the CBN saying we're going to double, farmers have to double the hectares and all of that. I see this approach every time we have this challenge, always wanting to bridge it. When COVID came, we started putting money into the pharmaceutical sector. Is that the way to go?
Well, I think what the central bank is trying to do is to not fold its hand and say there's nothing we can do. So at every point in time when we have these challenges, they come up to, you know, just do something. Do something. But ultimately what works is a system that encourages, you know, businesses to thrive, so that when challenges come, people see business opportunities and then they tackle it. Excuse me, from a private sector, you know, perspective. But I mean, to the extent that at least there's an institution doing something, I think the central bank deserves some credit.
The impact is what I'm always interested.
So the impact may not be as significant. Again, you're talking, it's like sometimes there's only so much the central bank can do. So you have a problem that can be fixed with 100 trillion or more. Look at what the central bank is doing with Infracorp. You know, a 15 trillion initiative. But by far, the infrastructure need for Nigeria is far higher than 15 trillion. But they're doing something, which is good and commendable.
It's a good way to leave it. I've been speaking to Chief Investment Officer, AfriInvest West Africa. They're breaking it down and making real sense of inflation and what we should expect as the MBS reels out the figures. I've been speaking to Mr. Robert Omotunde. Thank you so much, and do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.